let me make you a propositional statement around which this recording will revolve. One of the great ideas of the Bible is that man is absolutely dependent upon God. Animals are dependent upon God, but they don't know it because they're hardwired. An ocelot acts like an ocelot does. A puma acts like a puma does. A microbe acts like... Everything is hardwired. They bring forth after their own kind. Man is the one creature that is a sheep. A sheep is absolutely dependent upon a shepherd for guidance, protection, food, water, care, nurturing. Man is a sheep. He has a body that can work within the homeostasis of a universe and a world with gravity and oxygen and the need for light and chlorophyll. Man can't spell those things, but he needs them because God provides them. What you would call the mannishness of man, his conscience, his will, his emotions, his despair, his sadness, his happiness, all of those things are conditioned by God. Conscientia means with knowledge. Conscience means that you act with knowledge, that you have what are called self-evident truths. Our constitutional fathers call them. They're self-evident. You don't have to prove them. They're instinctive. You act out of them. They're called innate. They're natural. They're innate ideas. That all men are created equal. That there is a very self-evident, instinctive golden rule. When Jesus said, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you," he did not have to explain what he meant by "as you would have others do to you." He didn't have to explain that. Everyone knew what he meant. Everyone wants to be treated like a Calvinist, like a Baptist, like a Lutheran, like Mother Teresa. Everyone wants to be done right. There's honor among thieves. Even in the mafia, there's a code of silence. You don't rat on your mafia pals. And so there's a matrix out of which America was born. And it's this idea that I'm explaining, that man is in need of God to be able to give him meaning. It's why the American Revolution worked. The Russian Revolution did not work. The French Revolution did not work. The American Revolution worked because there was a bondage that America felt it was under, and it removed it, but it drew up a constitution. And that constitution was inseparable from self-evident truths, from nature's God of creation. Man created equal, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Those may not have been things that were from church councils, but they carried the ambience, the fragrance, the reverberations of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When those 101 got off the Mayflower with their Mayflower Compact, they understood. We just can't go running like the Oklahoma land rush out into Massachusetts here. That we've got to have a compact, something that keeps us together. After the revolution, we had to have a constitution. Revolutions are easy. Constitutions are tough. That they had to draw up with ways to harness man and to keep man from killing himself with checks and balances. It's a brilliant idea. And so man, apart from God, is in a world of hurt. He isn't meant to operate. God said to Adam and Eve, "Here's the tree of life. You eat of it." And it's like communion. You and I are in fellowship forever. This is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, meaning where you will know good and evil without me. The tree of independence. You can get rid of God and you can make life without God, which they teach to every freshman going into college. Your old ideas of God and church and stuff you can get rid of. Now you can fly free fly free, little bird. And so when you remove God, God said, in the day you do it, you die. It's like an astronaut on a spacewalk that has a tether that connects him to the mothership. You cut that tether, and all of your technology is lost. All that you are is lost. You are disconnected from the mothership. A pit bull has to be reined in, generally speaking. Don't email me if you got a good pit bull. But a pit bull has to be reined in. When you see him hit the end of that chain, you're okay. You remove that chain. About every year, we'll have a report of a number of pit bulls running loose that kill some kid. That once that pit bull realizes he's not chained, now you're in trouble. Whenever the lion finds out the cage is left unlocked, you're in trouble. Man has to be contained. Or it's like darkness. If all of a sudden you turn the light off, you cannot make your way in the world that you're in. You can't live anymore because you can't see the way things really are. And that's what God is. He's the tether. He's the chain. God is he's the light. In him is light, life. And no, wait, how does it go? In him was light, and his light was the life of men. And so, stick with me now. When men historically get rid of God, and that's what happened in the French Revolution. They got rid of God, but they didn't know what to replace it with. It was just nature and the authority of the state, and they killed everybody that didn't agree with them. Russia got rid of God, and they put communism in its place, and they killed everybody that didn't agree with them. Fidel Castro got rid of the church, made himself the law. You disagreed with him, he killed you. And so that's what happens historically, and it's not like this logically happens. This is what you study in history. Whenever the Roman Empire loses its sense of dignity, it becomes the beast, as did Greece, as did Persia, as did Babylon, as did Assyria. And so Israel always could function as a nation because they had a constitution that God had delivered them and given them his commandments. And they were Israel means he that strives with God. And so God is the very foundation of the name of Israel. And that's why that nation has stood, fallen, and come back so many times, because they have a standard outside of it. America began in that matrix. We were an amazing country. We took the best ideas that came over here from Europe, and it started America. Whenever you get rid of God, you've now got to find a substitute. You may use nature, as in India. You may use society, as the communist society rules. Or the French Revolution, the voice of the people is the voice of God, the 51% rules. Or you can have human reason, as in the Enlightenment. If it goes against reason, it must go against God. You can have science with Darwin. Now, he is the way that we interpret nature and reality, and the Big Bang is Charles Darwin. He's our new God. Or as in the French Revolution, what came up was Romanticism. It's not what you feel or not what you can observe in science. It's what you feel. It's what your emotions tell you what is right. Or you can put man. That's where we are today. That man does not submit to any meta-narrative of truth. He creates his own. Friedrich Nietzsche said God is dead. And now we need a Übermensch, a Superman that will create his own reality. And so man, when he gets rid of God, always has to find a substitute. Man can't make it without a final truth. And at that point, all of your substitutes fail because they're not infinite and they're not personal. And epistemologically, there's no way to say, says who, that this is absolutely true. And so all of those ideas, nature, society, reason, Darwin, feelings, man, existentialism, they all historically have fallen and failed. And they always follow a train of thought that without a standard, you become indecent. You can listen to comedians. They'll become indecent. and then you become immoral, and then you become perverted, where even nature does not hold you accountable. And then you will become violent, and then you will try to justify your actions and you become insane. One has said that when you get rid of God, man results in nothing but atoms and rabbits. That I am nothing but stuff, and I am stuff with a sex drive. And so you have a very despairing people with no sense of ultimate dignity that are motivated by sex, and usually by the other side of sex, which is violence. Man is ruled by his hormones. And now you're not merely in the jungle. The opposite of man is not nature. The opposite of man is demon. And now you find yourself amongst Dahmer and Manson and the Golden State Killer. Well, these are facts. These are things that happen. A country historically will disintegrate. It loses its integration point. You shall have no other gods. You shall not make an idol to what you think God is. You shall not take his name in vain. The God of the Bible, you will esteem him. You will honor the creation, the Sabbath. He is the creator. So in the Ten Commandments, you get solid on who God is. There is one God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the creator. And he is the God that he is infinite and you don't make a thing to look like him. Then, commandment 5, you honor your father and mother that teach you this. The home is solid. And then you don't mess with your neighbor's life, his wife, his name and reputation, his goods. You don't treat your neighbor bad. But we've got to get those first 4 together. The matrix, the standard, the spinal column that has to develop to where you can stand on. And so, when a country historically gets rid of God, you disintegrate. I enjoy life because I know where nature came from. I know where I came from. My buddy Darren down here, I know where he came from. The guy on the street, I know where he came from. I know right, I know wrong. My life is nice and wrapped up solid. My problem is not the failure of my philosophy. It's my inconsistency in living up to my philosophy, the person of God. And so, when you get rid of God, you start breaking up until finally you bottom out and you come to Sodom and Gomorrah. You come to the old world where evil filled the hands of man and every intent of his thought was on evil continually. And God said, I have to wipe it out. And so, what happens then, once a culture begins to bottom out, that historically in our country, you have some R's. You have a return to the God of our fathers. Then you have what's called a rebirth. Then you have, as it spreads out, it's called revival. Viva, to live. Revival means to live again. And then if it spreads even farther, you have what is called a reformation. You reform and you come back home. Well, I share this as this is what is happening in our culture, and it's what has happened. Let me show you. There's about 4 times in American history that this has happened. I hope it'll happen for a 5th time. That in 1720 to 1740, the Puritan dream of America had failed. The Puritans that landed here, they wanted to do as the Catholics tried to do in the Middle Ages, as the Anglicans wanted to do in England, as Eastern Orthodoxy wanted to do in Constantinople, that they attempted to have a Christian commonwealth to where the government, the religion, and the morals were lived under the commonwealth of the Bible. The Puritans felt that they were going to do correctly what the Catholics, the Eastern Orthodoxy, what Islam tries to have a commonwealth and Sharia law, that the Puritans were going to do it right. They attempted in New England what they felt England had failed in not turning to biblical, fundamental, reformed, historical Calvinism and piety. And so they left, and in a sense, the best of Europe washed up on our shores. And then you had what was called the Flight of the Puritans, where I think 50,000 Puritans came to the United States and they formed our thinking. Well, by the late 1600s, it was called the death of the Puritan dream. Two things happened. Number one, teenagers that did not carry the passion of their parents. And then secondly, superficiality. If you simply were part of the Puritan Commonwealth and you acknowledged the Congregational Church, you were considered a citizen, and it was just like Catholicism in the Middle Ages. It had no depth to it. And we found out that you can't legislate holiness. The Catholics had to find it out. The Eastern Orthodox had to find it out. The Muslims have never found it out. You can't legislate holiness. You must be born again. There's a work that takes place in every person's heart. And as a result, in 92, you had the Salem witch trials, where the Puritan Church's leaders had to apologize to the entire colonies for what they had done in the killing of these women based on the fact that someone accused them of being a witch. And then you saw the beginnings of deism. Harvard was now run by a deist that denied the Bible and the deity of Christ. Yale had begun, and Princeton would begin, and you began to see the denigration of American theology. And out of that, there came a return to the biblical message. A fellow showed up that was a revivalist named George Whitefield, a fellow named John Wesley, a fellow named Jonathan Edwards, a group of guys that started Princeton, and they slowly and surely began to call America back to that you are not a Christian because you're an American. You are not a Christian because you are a Puritan. You are not a Christian because you attend a Presbyterian church or a Congregational church, or down in the South, a Baptist church. Ye must be born again. A woman said to George Whitefield, "Why do you keep preaching you must be born again?" He said, "Because you must be born again." And they started the first outdoor meetings where thousands would gather to hear this simple message of faith in Jesus Christ must convert you. It doesn't matter if your parents are Christians or your grandparents. It does not matter if you're a Bradford or a Winthrop and you showed up on the Mayflower. You and God have to deal with this one-on-one. And so we had what was called the First Great Awakening. A tenth of the American population got converted. And you saw heroes arise, and it moved the docket back. As a matter of fact, it united our country. The colonies were united over a common revival. The war with England united us. United we stand. But before that was the First Great Awakening that caused all the colonies to think as one theologically. That was called the First Great Awakening. But it happened because of the deplorable conditions that were happening in our country. That was called, if you'll read the history books, called the death of the Puritan dream. America didn't work like we thought it would work because we left out the individual confrontation that a human has to have with God, not just the church and not just his family. In the 1800s, another generation arose. And now you had the French Enlightenment, 1789, had gotten into our country. Over in Yale and Harvard and Princeton, the young men would nickname themselves Rousseau and Voltaire and Montaigne. They would name them names from the French Enlightenment of atheism. Atheism became very popular. It showed up in the American East, and then as the America pressed to the West, what did we call the West? The wild, wild West. And what happened is we saw that it was happening again, that we had grown beyond our roots. We had got educated beyond our intelligence. And so you began to see down in New Jersey, you began to see in the Carolinas, strong biblical preaching the old message from the First Great Awakening that you must be born again. Your family doesn't matter. It doesn't matter about your country. It doesn't matter what colony you're in, what state you're in. It doesn't matter if you're now an American after the Revolution. You and God have to deal with it. And so they began out in the West, they began what were called camp meetings, that 10,000 people might meet up just for preaching out in the wilderness. As a matter of fact, the Congregationalists and the Presbyterians got together in what was called the Plan of Union, that any town that began, they would put a church in that town. That's why when you see pictures of the Old West, you see in the old downtowns, for what it's worth. You saw a school, you saw a court building, and you saw a church. That's what it was built around: education, law, and God. And then you began to see the camp meetings produced what was called revivalism. And this was really the American gospel, that you have to make a choice. You have to, in a sense, cast your vote. It's not what your mama wants. It's not what the country wants. It's not what your colony wants. It's not what your denomination wants. You, and they began to do this now at the camp meetings. It was called an altar call. It's now an American fundamental idea that at the end of the message, we're going to leave it open, and you have to do something. You have to get up out of you, and you have to come forward, and you have to make a decision for Jesus Christ. That started in the early 1800s, and it began to be the American gospel. Now you can guess why this worked so well in America. Among Baptists, among Methodists, the altar call, the decision that you make, that was America. That we vote. You make a choice in this. You choose. Do you want God? If you don't want him, you can walk away. And if you do, and so that became, even though it's old to us now, it was new then, that all of these frontiersmen would get together, all of these people on the East Coast, and there would now be preaching that would call for a decision. Billy Graham carried on that tradition, and his magazine was called Decision Magazine. And so that was the 1800s. So you had the First Great Awakening, then you had the Second Great Awakening. And it moved the needle back. After the Second Great Awakening, you saw this huge number of Bible colleges begun out in west of the Alleghenies. And now we felt that every American child could have a chance in knowing about God. And so it moved the needle back. And then you go to 1858, another generation from 1800 to 1858. You tell me, if you were an American in the 1858s, was there something in the air that would have worried you? It was called slavery. And there was a fellow running for president called Lincoln. And his platform was he was going to abolish slavery. He didn't talk about emancipation, but he talked about the illegality, and he was going to end slavery. And the South felt that was dependent upon their economy, and they found ways to justify it by the scriptures. And there was enormous tension in our country, in Bleeding, Kansas, and all sorts of stuff of whether you were pro-slave, anti-slavery. And Lincoln got elected. And the next day, South Carolina seceded, and then other states. And they were going to form their own country, confederacy. Lincoln said, you can't do that. They said, yes, we can. He said, no, you can't. And we had a war that was the bloodiest American war, American blood falling where we were. And out of the fear of that, you began to see in 1858 prayer meetings throughout all the United States. In Manhattan, they would sound the bells of the churches, and all the businessmen would go to prayer meeting for 1 hour to pray for our country. And out of that began what was called the Layman's Prayer Revival. And then after that was over, and in the Layman's Prayer Revival, the American modern missions movement began. Not of old people that decided they would be missionaries with nothing left to do, but college students. And it reached America, it went into England. It was worldwide, the 1858 revival. And it came to an end, in a sense, with the Civil War. And then after that, we began going into the late early 1900s, and you had the Industrial Revolution, where man deified science. And you had the coming of Charles Darwin. You had the coming of modern biblical criticism, treating the Bible as any other book and trying to find holes in it. You saw the arisal of postmodern philosophy, that man creates his own truth. And out of that came modern man, man without God, and then postmodern man, man without man. One has said this, that modern man has been a progression of the Lord is my shepherd, everything is my shepherd, I am my shepherd, nothing is my shepherd. And that's where we are today. We're back to atoms and rabbits. America has bottomed out again. The Jesus Revolution was a whole generation that saw philosophy has not worked, education has not worked. Pleasure and drugs have not worked. Communism has not worked. And there was a movement back to the person of God. It's very interesting that where you see societal turmoil, no matter how bad it gets, you will never hear the word God. You'll sure never hear the word Christ. You'll never hear the word Scripture. You'll never hear the word sin. You'll surely not hear the word hell. And you will never hear the word Satan. It's interesting that Satan makes sure that in a culture, the two things you never talk about are God and the devil. Because those are two spiritual things that are about us that Satan wants us never to acknowledge. God and the devil. Whenever society bottoms out, those two unspoken terms get spoken of. That there is evil, there is wrong, there is sin, there's going to be hell because God has been denied and Satan is among us. And men now turn back to not the good old God of nature, they turn back to revival, vive again. All of these revivals were where men through pain were driven back beyond their philosophies, beyond their science, to the self-evident truth of God, of good, of evil, and of Satan. That's what has to happen in America. When you see the horror that is happening in our world, you will not hear God, Christ, Bible, sin, Satan, and hell spoken of. Whenever you do see it spoken of, that is when man blows aside the smoke of his own rationalism and comes back to the undergirding truths of the Garden of Eden. That man is made for God. And in the day that you rebel, you will die. So, if you're hearing this recording, you may be saying, he's crazy. What alternative do you have? They've all been tried. What alternative do you have? Ultimately, it's going to come down to one of two choices. We can turn to Christ, or we can turn to another man called Antichrist. Read 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Those are the last two choices of man. I take Christ. Thank you.